Would you ever date someone who lives in another city, state, or country that's hours and hours away? Long distance dating isn't for the faint of heart, but it's not impossible to do either. Meeting someone you hit it off with when traveling, or right before a big move, or when they're passing through your town is actually pretty common. But how can you make it work? How can you get through the mess of early dating when you're also dealing with long distance? That's what today's episode is all about. Welcome back to Dating Intentionally. I'm Talia. I'm a dating coach, and I'm sharing no nonsense advice for navigating modern dating with confidence and ease. Whether you've been on dozens of dates or you're just getting started, I believe dating can be fun, yes, even when you are hundreds of miles away from your person. I want to start off by saying that I have not done early dating long distance myself, but in this episode, you're going to hear what has worked for other daters in this community who have successfully done long distance in the early stages of dating. I do have some experience with long distance in an established relationship, and I'll be talking about that as well. I think this is a really important topic because today, with technology and the internet, we're way more connected to people who don't live near us. It is absolutely realistic that you could meet someone on Instagram or Reddit or Discord or TikTok who lives far from you, hit it off, and start dating. Or you could meet someone while traveling for work or for fun, or while they're passing through where you live. Long distance dating is possible. And I think a lot of the advice I share on this podcast and on my Instagram applies to long distance, but there are definitely some major differences that we're going to focus on navigating that in this episode. So, I want to start with an email I got from a listener who met her husband in Taiwan, where she lived. He was visiting Taiwan on vacation from California. They chatted for a week online and hung out in person for 3 days, then continued chatting for 9 months before meeting in person again. And that's when they decided to start dating officially. After that, they visited each other twice a year, taking turns traveling to and from each other. They were lucky if they spent 20 days in person together, and that lasted for 3 years. Then she moved to California and they got married. She added in her note to me, COVID literally hit 4 months later, so we went from long distance to being quarantined together like that, snaps fingers. The irony never ceases to amaze me. So that is a lot. 3 years of long distance, and then they got married. So here are her tips. One, both parties must be aligned in terms of expectations from the start. Setting these expectations early helps build the foundation of what's most important in any relationship: communication. In a long distance relationship, sometimes it's just about how you communicate, but also the logistics of communicating. Because of our time difference, there was only a small window where we could talk every day. This means making sacrifices on both our parts, like I would skip eating lunch with coworkers every day to FaceTime him, and sometimes he would step out during parties to call me. But we didn't mind it because we were aligned in making and keeping in touch with each other a priority. So I love this tip. Setting expectations is important in any new relationship, but long distance adds another layer with communication, timing, how much, how often, how long. I also love that she mentioned making each other a priority and showing up by making those sacrifices to stay connected when they could. Long distance isn't going to work if you can't do that, right? You need to say, like, hey, I have to step out, or hey, I can't hang out at this time because I have a FaceTime with my girlfriend or my boyfriend, whatever. So I love that she is being so real about that. Okay, here is her second tip: talk about everything. She writes, let's be honest, there's not much else you could be doing anyway, because in a long distance relationship, you don't have the luxury of observing what each other is like as in person. You've got to do the awkward thing and talk about it. Do you like your dishes done right away after you cook? Which way do you like the toilet paper to be? This helps reduce the shock factor when you are able to get together in person because you've talked about all the mundane things already. In retrospect, this was actually the aspect of long distance relationships that benefited us the most because we probably would have never dug so deep if we didn't have to. I love this. I mean, it's true. The one thing about long distance that can be kind of a trap is that you don't get to observe each other in each other's lives. So there's a lot more room for fantasy and for you to build a perfect version of them in your mind that doesn't actually exist. I love that this listener shared that they were honest and talked about all their habits so they knew what to expect when they ultimately moved in together. Also, I think this can be a fun conversation when you're getting to know someone. It's fun to talk through all these little habits and quirks that we have. Thanks again for sharing this. So, next, you're going to hear from a listener who met her boyfriend on Bumble, and then 3 months into their relationship, he had to move away. They've been doing long distance for over a year. Here is what she has suggested. The first one is do daily check ins. For us, it's via text. We share about our day, our plans, how we're feeling, and we don't text all day long, but we always start with a good morning text. I love that. There's an anchor, right? An anchor for connection is a good morning text. We know what to expect, and that probably makes them both feel very secure. Her second tip is we share our special moments with each other. We communicate and share pictures often of our activities with our family, outings, and special events. It helps us stay connected and in each other's lives. I love the idea of sharing pictures frequently. It helps you kind of feel like you're more involved in each other's lives. You have the visual, right? What are they doing? What are they seeing? What are they experiencing? So I think sharing pictures really can enhance texting in a long distance relationship and when you're not long distance, right? It's nice to send pictures even if you're not doing long distance. Her third tip is flirt and keep the sexual tension going in between visits. We like to be playful and express our desire for each other. I am very mindful that I don't want us to feel like pen pals during the periods where we're apart. Love this. She basically is saying that in order to not feel like friendly platonic pen pals, they are probably sexting and maybe having sexy phone calls, all that kind of stuff, maybe sending spicy pictures between visits to keep that romance and sexual aspect of their relationship alive when they're not physically together. She also adds routine visits are a priority every 4 to 6 weeks for us. We understand that our time is limited, but that time we spend together is valuable. We both agree that we value the quality time in a relationship over the quantity. Huge shift. I mean, when you are dating someone who lives near you, you can see each other every day for like short bursts of time. You can grab a quick coffee, you can go for a run, you can just have a quick meal together, whatever. But then when you're long distance, you have to really soak in the time you spend together because it's could be few and far between. 4 to 6 weeks sounds like a great cadence as well. Her next tip is take time to connect physically and intimately during visits. Even though we don't see each other often, absence creates desire. We also discuss and communicate our expectations for meeting this need so we're on the same page. So important. I think this is huge. Being able to discuss expectations around sex, physical intimacy before you see each other, before, huge, right? Especially in early dating, if you're not ready to have sex or if you're not interested in having sex with that person yet, you need to make sure that you're on the same page before you show up to their place or before they show up to your place for a weekend or a week or however long you're doing your visit. Because it can get weird, right? When one person expects that you're going to be intimate and the other person doesn't want to, it can be a little tense. Just get it out of the way, have the conversation beforehand. And I also love this idea of saying what you need, right? Before the visit happens. So everyone is on the same page. You can be in the right mindset to meet each other's needs physically. And I just love that. Moving along, be open and communicate each other's needs and expectations for a long distance relationship. So she's saying it can be challenging to know what your partner is going through when you don't see them often. Sometimes I need extra reassurance to support and I can't obtain it because we can't physically be together. I've learned to speak up and let him know what I need and vice versa. In addition, we are both responsive to each other by providing support, attentiveness, and expressing affection and care when the other needs it. Amazing. I mean, I think in a long distance relationship, you have to learn how to speak up for your needs even more because communication, texting, calling is the only way you can get your needs met at that point. So you need to be really comfortable saying what you need from the other person, and hopefully the other person can step up and meet those needs. She writes, lastly, it is important to note that long distance relationship is built on a foundation of trust. Trust builds security. Each of us could choose to date or be in a relationship with someone closer, but we don't. We trust that we both want to be in this relationship and we consciously choose through our words, actions, and behaviors. Although we have been apart for a little over a year, I have never doubted or questioned my trust in him and his commitment to our relationship. We both stated that we would communicate any concerns we had from the beginning so that we could continue a foundation of trust. I love this so much, and thank you so much for sharing. I want to stress what this listener said about trust. I feel like long distance requires another level of trust that you don't need as much when you're dating someone locally because you can't be with them and share moments together in the same physical space as often. If you're someone who struggles in any relationship to speak up for your needs, ask for reassurance, and if you feel anxious often, long distance is only going to make all of that more challenging. I also love that they see each other every 4 to 6 weeks. That cadence might not be possible for everyone doing long distance, but it seems like they figured out something that works for them. And it could take time to figure out the cadence that works for you. Okay, we're going to do one more. So, this is from a listener who lives in DC, and she's in a long distance relationship with a guy who lives in New York City. They weren't total strangers when they met. They had mutual friends and they had met each other casually before deciding to date, and they're both in their mid 20s. They make it work by FaceTiming every weeknight for 10 minutes to an hour, and they send each other Snapchats during the day. Honestly, I prefer Snapchat for this too because sending photos through text can take up a lot of space sometimes. She mentioned she tries to keep texting and snaps during the day to a minimum because it's too distracting. And honestly, I think that 10 to 15 minutes of FaceTime sounds better than constant texting. It's important to note here, like for long distance, you have a couple modes of communication. I would say FaceTimes and phone calls are top tier. Sending photos of what you're doing is like the next best thing. Texting is important. And then you also have voice notes. So those are a bunch of different ways to communicate throughout the day and stay connected. This couple takes turns traveling to each other every weekend and sleeping in each other's apartments. She writes, for instance, he will arrive in DC on Saturday around noon and leave Sunday night after dinner or early Monday morning. They started dating exclusively after their first weekend long date and had a few shorter dates prior to that. So this listener shared with me about something interesting, which is the cost of long distance dating, which honestly isn't talked about enough. She said, "We spend 400 to 500 a month on train tickets. He makes way more than I do and does not seem deterred by this, whereas I have had to cut back on a lot of my other spending to make this work. I find myself scaling back on my own activities as a result, for example, yoga classes and happy hours, which doesn't always feel great. But I also want to keep things equal between us in terms of time and money investment." I'm so glad that she brought up the money thing, and also thank you for being so vulnerable about how you feel about how much you're spending and that you've had to make some sacrifices to make it work. I think again, the way you spend money in a relationship isn't permanent. You can always revise and figure out and keep iterating and figure out a way to spend money that is comfortable for both partners. So like if this person ever did want to make an adjustment and talk to her boyfriend about, hey, can you cover my next, like maybe every few train tickets for me so that I, can still do my yoga classes? I think that's totally fair. Another thing she mentioned when she wrote to me is time commitment. Besides the changes to my routine due to my spending habits changing, the setup also makes it harder to spend time with friends during the weekend. Either I'm not in town or I have to work around the time window of him being in DC. It's not ideal. So again, another honest truth about long distance is that when your person is in town or when you are traveling, it takes away from time out of your normal routine, your social life, your family life. It does disrupt these things. So, just another thing to keep in mind when you're doing long distance. And if you're feeling the strain of that, it's probably pretty normal. All right, here are some tips that she shared. Since we spend over 24 hours together when we see each other in person on weekends, it's a very different way of getting to know someone. On one hand, it's impossible to be quote unquote on the entire time. So you do get to know the other person with their guards down as well. You see them brushing their teeth, you hang out in your pajamas and run weekend errands together. It is all consuming when we are around each other. A quote unquote second or third 24-hour date feels like 5 or 8 dates in many ways. We are already acting like a couple over the weekend due to this intimacy created out of logistical convenience. I mean, true. When you go from not spending any time with someone and then all of a sudden you are together for like 48 hours straight, you will slip into these like coupley vibes because you're kind of forced to. She also writes, this accelerated intimacy makes it very confusing to rationally assess whether you're compatible, since it can make it hard to get into the dater view mode and ask more pointed values questions out of the blue when you're hanging out casually for extended periods of time. I sincerely fear that this intimacy is clouding my judgment on whether I like him or not, but I also recognize that dating is about connection and chemistry, which we clearly have. I think it's great that this person who's writing to us and sharing this with us, again, thank you, is being honest about how long distance can make it tougher to really judge if someone is right for you long term. And there's no easy fix for that. It's kind of just going through it and taking your time, still going slow and evaluating the connection each step of the way and how you feel in the connection. She also writes, as an introvert slash avoidant, there is a period towards the end of the weekend when I feel myself being more turned off and icked out by him. I attribute this to overexposure, but this leads to a Monday, Tuesday period where I have intense feelings of doubt and I create distance by being extra low contact because I find myself needing a break. That being said, I know rationally that it is a compatibility green flag that we like each other's company and feel comfortable enough to spend this much time together. And my interest slash desire builds back up during the week before we see each other over the weekend again. I wonder if this self reflection cycle is common for long distance people whenever they spend time apart. If you have any insight on this and you want to add to this conversation, you can head over to Instagram at Date Not Intentionally and comment on the post. I have a post for this episode, so you can comment on the post. You can also comment on Spotify below, if you're listening on Spotify, or on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. And I just want to say, like, again, I appreciate this vulnerability because I think that it's very honest to say, after spending a weekend together, I feel like I need a break and I feel like creating distance. And then by the end of the week, I'm feeling like I want to spend more time with him. And it's like, that is normal. If you are doing a long distance relationship, that I think that cycle is really normal because it's just not like compare when we compare it to local dating or not long distance dating, you get to have shorter bursts of time together followed by breaks, and you kind of have a different pattern. Long distance dating is intense because you have long periods of absence followed by intense periods together where you're basically together with no breaks. It is intense, and I think what you're feeling is normal. And the last thing she shared is this way of dating also makes it hard to slow things down on the sexual front. Although we have not had penetrative sex yet, let's go boundaries, we have cuddled and increasingly fooled around from date two on onwards simply because we are staying in each other's places and sleeping in the same bed. Sometimes this makes me anxious since I know I can't avoid sleeping in the same bed and cuddling entirely, even in a scenario where I might want to keep things highly platonic for a change. I mean, yeah, I think having expectations and boundaries around sex in long distance and not long distance dating super important, and I'm glad that you guys are discussing this. I'm glad you are sticking to your boundaries and doing what feels comfortable. And I hope if you're listening to this that this is a helpful example of how you can take it slow in a long distance relationship. You don't have to have sex when you see them if you don't want to and if you are trying to take it slow. Again, I love how candid this listener is with us and so real about all the feelings she has. So thank you again for your vulnerability and thank you for sharing with us. Again, if you have tips for long distance dating, go ahead to Instagram, dating not intentionally, comment on the post. I have a post for this episode and you can share in the comments what your tips are. And you can also comment if you're listening on Spotify or on YouTube. And, while you're there, hit the follow button, subscribe, drop a review. Really appreciate it. So I want to talk about some things to watch out for and avoid with long distance. The first level is expectations around communication, right? When can we expect to hear from each other? When are good times to talk to each other and connect? You can be like, "Oh, I'm usually free around 4:30 and 5 o'clock when I'm switching from work to my evening routine. I'd love to get on the phone with you and chat then." Or like, "Oh, I would love to chat with you while I'm slowly waking up and getting out of bed and just getting ready for my day." Or, maybe we can do a longer call on the weekends. We'll just find some time. It doesn't have to be a set routine, but I think having some expectations around communication is fair because it's all you have. It takes the place of dating and like how often you're going to see each other in real life and have dates, right? So that's the first level of expectations. The second level of expectations is of the relationship. And you might move through some of the stages to commitment more quickly because with distance, it's kind of harder to do that in between, like, talking stage, exclusivity, no labels stage. It's going to work better if you don't multi date, if that makes sense. Like, if you're in a long distance talking stage with someone or like early dating, and then you're also going on dates locally, I think you're probably gonna end up with someone you're gonna date locally. Let's be real, long distance is hard unless that other person is, like, for some reason, the love of your life. I don't know, like, you're probably gonna end up dating someone locally because it's just easier. So I think long distance early dating works best when everyone from day one is only seeing each other, and that's okay. That type of dating is totally fine. It's just less confusing, and you can really start to build that foundation of trust. All three examples I shared with you, by the way, they all did this, right? From day one, they only were seeing each other. All right, the second thing to avoid is not having something on the calendar in terms of seeing each other. I asked a lot of people for long distance dating tips, and the number one most common tip is to have your next visit planned during your current visit. So if you're currently seeing each other, Plan the next visit while you are physically together. So that way you always have something to look forward to. And this tip applies to relationships, like just any relationship. Having something to look forward to is really important for having a healthy, happy relationship. Always having a plan, a date, something to look forward to on the calendar, it's going to infuse your relationship with happiness and joy. And for long distance, specifically, it infuses the relationship with more trust and security because you know that date is on the calendar. You are buying tickets, you are making plans, you're getting the hotel reservation, whatever it is, to see each other. And here is the thing, if you meet someone and they don't live near you, if there's no way to travel to see each other, if you don't have the money, if you don't have the time, what is the point of dating? There's literally no point of dating if you don't have the means to see each other and you're long distance. At that point, you need to get real with yourself about why you're pursuing a relationship with someone you can't even be with physically. In the early stages of a relationship, I think it's important to focus on when you can see each other, how often. You don't need to solve the long distance though. Like in the first few months of dating, you don't need to know what the end is going to be. Like, yes, long distance has to come to an end at some point for the relationship to work. That could be a year, it could be 5 years, but it has to have some kind of end. But you don't need to worry about that in the early stages. The first thing to worry about is just like, when can we see each other? How often can we afford it? Right? Another thing to consider, by the way, is you don't have to necessarily go visit each other at each other's places. You could go on a trip together and meet somewhere in the middle if that's easier. That is always an option. I mean, I have long distance friendships, and I recently went to Mexico City with a friend, and it was easier for us to kind of meet in Mexico City than it would be have been for me to fly to New York or for her to fly to California. It was cheaper. I don't know. It just worked out. All right, the third thing to avoid is being pen pals. And this came up a few times, but I want to get into some long distance date ideas. Now, there are so many ways to spend time together when you're long distance, and here are some of the common ones. You could play virtual games together, right? There are a lot of games you can play online, on your phone, at the same time, virtually. When I travel, sometimes Johnny and I would have a chess game going together. And obviously, that's not playing together in real time because you can take a whole day to make a move. But like having that was really fun. And I honestly loved playing long distance chess with him. So find the games you like. It could be like role playing games. It could be like a Pictionary or like a crossword or just something basic. There are so many games you can play online. Another common date idea is watching a show together virtually. So again, even though Johnny and I weren't long distance, we used to do this all the time when we were like, because we lived 20 minutes away from each other. But like, if we wanted to hang out without actually leaving our apartments, we would just start a show together at the same time. We'd call each other, we'd count down, we'd hit play at the same time, and then we'd hang up and we'd be texting throughout the show. You can FaceTime throughout the show. There are so many different ways to watch something together, but that is a great long distance date idea. And it's something that's easy. It's like you're already watching TV probably at the end of the day. Why not do it with your partner? Other ideas that I love are cooking the same recipe together for dinner and having a FaceTime, like FaceTiming while cooking and eating, or getting takeout, quote unquote, together and eating while you're on FaceTime. I mean, obviously, FaceTime's a huge proportion of long distance dating. So, one of what someone who wrote in said, I wish we had stats on the hours of FaceTime we spent together. And it must have been a lot. There are also question card games, so you can both have a deck of cards and you can ask each other on the phone. I love the and card games. I actually have a discount for you for the and card games in the show notes. So you can grab that. And you can also go on walks together on the phone. Like maybe if you love walking, just get your AirPods, call them on the phone and do like a walk and talk. It's almost like they're there. Also, there are question apps like Agape. There's free versions, so you can like answer questions together virtually, and that's another way to get to know each other. It's really fun. I've done this with Johnny when we are apart from each other for like over a week. So yeah, those are my ideas. Again, if you have more ideas, you can drop them below. If you are listening on Spotify, watching on YouTube, or if you have head over to Instagram and want to share your ideas there, go for it. Okay, the fourth thing to avoid is the pressure to get physical. So this came up a few times in this episode already, but you don't have to get physical early on right away. If you listen to my episode with matchmaker Maria, where we talk about the 12 date rule, part of the 12 date rule, if you're long distance, is that you only have to have 3 in-person dates, and then the rest can be like phone call, virtual, FaceTime, whatever. And then after you've done 12 of those, then, go for it and have sex. Obviously, okay, look, that's just one example of how to do it, but you don't have to have sex when you see each other in person early on if you want to get to know them more and make sure that they're the real deal. It's totally fine. Just make sure that you communicate those boundaries before you see each other so everyone's on the same page and you don't feel pressure. You don't have to have sex to get someone to like you. Okay? Like you don't have to have sex to keep someone interested in you. That is absolutely ridiculous. Let's just like throw that idea out the window. Okay? Like sex is important, but if you're only having sex because you're worried they're going to lose interest, that is not a good reason to have sex with someone. You also don't have to share a bed when you're visiting, right? If you are doing a visit, you can stay in an Airbnb, you can stay in a hotel. If they have space, you can, maybe they have a guest room or you have a guest room, that kind of thing. You can stay with a different friend if you have a friend locally to them, whatever. You don't have to share a bed when you're visiting each other early on in long distance. All right, the fifth thing to avoid, and this goes for all types of dating, distance or not, is fantasizing. Okay, absence can warp our perception of someone. We've got to stay grounded in reality of who they are and what we actually know about them, not what we think we know about them, not our assumptions about them based on what we know. We have to focus on what we actually know for real about this person. Same is true for long distance. I think with long distance we can easily build a fantasy version of them in our minds and fall in love with that version, and then we get to see them in real life and we realize that they're human with flaws just like everyone else, and then you get the ick and then you don't want to see them anymore. I don't want that to happen for you. So that's something to avoid. The fantasizing, let's not do it. The other side of fantasizing, by the way, is assuming the worst. So if you're in a long distance relationship with someone and you're working on building trust, and let's just say they might take a little longer to respond to one of your texts, maybe don't automatically assume that they don't like you or they met someone else or something. Like you need to be aware of that as well. And again, focus on the facts, focus on building that trust, and figure out what you need to feel that trust. If you are someone who you're just kind of not a trusting person, right? Maybe you have trust issues. A lot of us do. I do. And you're someone who automatically assumes the worst every time and you're really working through that. Maybe a long distance relationship isn't for you, right? And that's okay. And the last thing to avoid is not having an end. Long distance, if you are dating to marry, if you are dating to be in a long term relationship, dating to have a partner for life, you need to come together at some point. Someone needs to move. You don't need to worry about this in the early stages necessarily, okay? Maybe spend the first year getting to know them, spend the first year just seeing if you want to do more years, right? Then figure out who's going to move. Can you both uproot yourselves and meet somewhere else and live there? Is one of you going to move to the other person? What are you going to do? It has to have an end. Luckily for me, I work remotely. When Johnny moved, he moved from California to Seattle, knowing that he will probably go back to California. And luckily we met and I was able to go back to California with him. Let's just say though, for example, if I had a job in Seattle that I couldn't leave right away, we would have had to do long distance for a while. And then I would have had to figure out how to get a job in California. And that would have been a period of long distance. And that's okay. But it has to have an end. Someone has to have a plan to move. The other scenario would have been that he just stayed in Seattle, right at his job that he had. And that was that, but it has to have an end. If there's no way for you to figure that out, then your relationship isn't going to last very long. So I want to talk a little bit about my experience with long distance. So my ex, who I was with for 6 years, we did long distance for 1 year. It was 3 years into our relationship, and he actually was in the army and he deployed to Africa. And during that time, I moved temporarily to Colorado. And living in Colorado was the best year of my 20s, honestly. I loved living in Colorado. And I was so happy to have that chance. Like, I'm so happy that my ex deployed and did that. Honestly, I was talking to him about moving to Colorado for a year or like 6 months before he even got the deployment news. Like, this was something I'm like, I just have to do this. I have to do this. I need to be a ski bum for 1 year of my life. And it was great. It ended up working out so well. We decided to keep our relationship open. Like, we could hook up with other people during that 1 year part, but we both didn't act on it. I had like a flirty relationship with someone during that time, but like it didn't feel fair because the situations didn't feel equal, right? So we met up twice during our year of distance. The first visit was like 6 weeks after he left. And then the second visit was 6 months later. So yeah, I actually flew to him in Africa and we had a great time. We had a trip in Tanzania And he helped pay for that trip because at the time I wasn't making a lot of money. This was before I went full time in my last business. And he had like no expenses. So he was happy to buy my flight and pay for the hotel. And that was like we spent 5 days together, I think. That was a pretty short visit for a trip to Africa, but I'm really glad we did that. And then, after that, we had a plan. At the end of his deployment, he came to Colorado. He stayed with me for a few weeks. And then I moved out and we both drove back to the East Coast and moved in together. That's what kept me sane, right? Knowing that in that year, at the end of it, we would be coming back together and moving in together in New York. That was like the plan. And look, the distance was hard. He would be off the grid for weeks at a time, like no contact whatsoever. And that was just something, I had to figure that out. I distracted myself. I had lots of friends. I went hiking every day. I was snowboarding. I was working really hard and I got through it. We'd FaceTime sometimes, but we were more texting. We texted daily, even with the time difference, and we got used to it. Like I knew I'd be texting him from when I woke up to like 1 p.m. and then he'd come back online right before I went to sleep. And that was kind of the cadence, and you just kind of get used to it. We sent each other packages and letters. He arranged to have flowers delivered on my birthday. Like we were able to show up for each other as a couple. And again, having the end date made it easier. I don't think I would have stayed with him if he wasn't going to come back. Africa's pretty far. So my best advice is, again, I've said this already, is to always have visits planned. Prioritize that. It gives you something to look forward to. It gives you something to expect and some security. And routines also will help you feel more secure. And I think we heard that from, the folks who submitted their advice. Having these kind of routines around communication and seeing each other really help with the security and trust part. I think long distance works best when both people are all in and you don't want to be dragging someone along. Like if you are trying to set up like a routine where you're calling each other before dinner every single day and the other person just like isn't following through, doesn't want to do it. They're like, "Oh, do we have to?" It's not a great sign, you know? And if that person is, pushing back on the routine you're trying to set, you need to ask them, okay, what do you want to do? How do you see this going? You need to make sure that you're getting a picture from them of like what they expect in long distance. Like get on the same page of what a successful long distance relationship looks like to each of you and find that middle ground. So, when should you pursue a long distance relationship? Let's talk about this for a second. I think you should pursue a long distance relationship if you or they are in a location that either one of you visits often or isn't hard for you to get to, right? Like maybe they live in your hometown and you left, but you go to your hometown like a few times a year to visit family. So that's actually pretty nice. Another green flag would be that either one of you could potentially easily change jobs and locations. If either one of you has some flexibility, that's a great sign that the long distance could come to an end. Another green flag is that you're both enthusiastic about your connection and exploring a committed relationship, right? This works best if you are like, we're going to be exclusive from day one. We're going to go all in. We're going to try this. That's going to be the best case scenario. And same as any dating, that your goals align. That's another green flag. That's a must, right? This aligns with all the dating advice I give on this podcast. The long distance relationship will work if they can meet your needs, if you have similar values, if you have similar goals in life, if you want the same kind of relationship, like you both want to get married or you both want to not get married but be life partners, whatever it is. If your values don't align, if your goals don't align, if your lifestyles don't align, it's still not going to work. The relationship needs to add to your life more than it takes away from your life. So if it's causing you stress, if it's causing you anxiety, if it's making you sad most of the time, don't be in it. All right, that is it for my long distance episode. Thanks so much for everyone who submitted their advice. And I also want to just thank you for your patience because this episode has been requested so many times. And I spent a long time on it because I just wanted to get it right. And I wanted to make sure it was as useful as possible for everyone who is entering a long distance relationship. I mean, I am really wishing you the best and I hope it works out. I hope this episode has helped you. Thank you again for listening. Thanks for trusting me. And I want to remind you that you are doing great. I'd love it if you share this episode with someone who is navigating dating and might need a little confidence boost or some tough love. If any of these episodes have helped you in your journey, you can help me by leaving a stunning review on Apple or giving Dating Intentionally 5 stars on Spotify. I'd really appreciate it. Once again, I'm Talia. This has been Dating Intentionally, and I'll catch you next time.